raise their hand for me. Thank you. Now look to your left. Thank you. Look to your right. Why did you just do what I asked you to do? Did you want to do that? You might barely know me, or consider me a peer, not someone in authority over you, correct? But by giving me the chance and ability to speak to you today and convince you to think something, you have given me authority. With that authority you have given me, I now have Rhetoric's most important instruments. Now hold on to that thought. I have another scenario for you. Imagine you have an opportunity for some extra cash and find you are able to participate in a scientific experiment. Would you take it? If you were to accept this opportunity, it would go something like this. Good afternoon, I'm Dr. Stanley Milgram. Today we are trying an experimental learning technique where you will be the teacher. As the teacher, you will ask a question, and if the student, whom you are unable to see, answers you wrong as the teacher, you will administer an electric shock. For each wrong answer, the shock will grow exponentially stronger. As you participate in this experiment, the student continues to get answers wrong and starts to yell out in pain. The label machines tells you that you are nearing fatal levels. You hear screaming and pleading for it to stop, but the scientists persist that you keep going, even after the student is no longer responding. What do you do? This is a real experiment that was performed in 1961 by a Stanley Milgram as a professor's assistant at Yale University. This experiment is named the Milgram experiment after its creator, and its goal was to analyze obedience to authority. It also sought to explain why the events of World War II happened, and how so many people were deceived to commit such terrible acts. Volunteers were paid off the streets for this experiment as the teacher, and actors were cast unknowingly to the volunteers to play the student. The outcome of this experiment showed that a shocking 65% of participants were convinced to administer up to a fatal 450 volts. The experimenters used their authority as scientists and assuring that they, the scientists, would claim full responsibility for any mishaps to convince these people to do things they may not want to do. This may also give insight into how leaders like Hitler started what he did. The scientists in this experiment used their authority and ethos to enhance their otherwise mediocre rhetoric, to convince the others to do what they want. This paper will show that authority and ethos are rhetoric's most useful instruments. Nowadays, people believe anything they hear on television from politicians, doctors, or religious figures. But those facts that they portray are not always true and accurate. Today, I'm showing you how authority used by them can be dangerous and good. But I'm not telling you to ignore these figures, merely to understand that these figures have authority, and it is their most powerful tool. Now, before we delve into our argument, we must first set straight our terms. Webster states that rhetoric is the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing. Webster also states that authority is the power to influence or command thought, opinion, or behavior. Further, ethos is the distinguishing character, sentiment, or guiding beliefs of a person, group, or institution. It is important to understand what ethos is. A simpler definition can be the credibility of a speaker, and it is the most important part when trying to argue or persuade someone. By definition, all of these attributes described in the definitions are all used by Adolf Hitler, Mark Antony, and Jesus, who use authority and ethos to be more persuasive in their rhetoric. Authority and ethos go hand in hand and will be mentioned in conjunction with each other, because you cannot have one without the other. Ethos and authority are the pillars of rhetoric, and without which rhetoric would collapse. Adolf Hitler, a name that has stained history with violence and horror. Mark Antony, who rings through the pages stage in history to sway Rome from anger. And finally, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who lays for us the foundation and teachings for Christianity, all have undeniable authority and use it to bolster their impeccable rhetoric and drive the strongest forces in history. Even Aristotle argued that ethos, credibility, or authority of a speaker, is the strongest part of rhetoric. Kings, leaders, and visionaries would not be where they are today without authority backing their rhetoric. These three men will prove to you today that authority, in conjunction with rhetoric, in conjunction with ethos, is rhetoric's most useful instrument. The rise of the Third Reich was orchestrated by a man named Adolf Hitler and was accomplished by using his authority and impeccable rhetoric. Hitler was born in Austria in 1889. He began his journey fighting World War I and returning home with honors. He joined a group that would later become the Nazi Party, and in a struggle to gain power, he was wounded and sent to prison, where he wrote his first draft of his autobiography, Mein Kampf. After serving only 9 months of his 5-year sentence, he was released. After he was released, he was forbidden to make speeches in Germany until 1929. In the midst of the chaos and panic of the Great Depression, however, he continued to grow the Nazi Party until it became the second most popular party in Germany. Hitler was anointed chancellor in 1933, where he became the most infamous dictator in all of history. This history has established Hitler's authority, which we can now prove was influential in Hitler's rhetoric, and how he became the despised stain that he is today. We always wonder how so many people could have fallen under the poisonous spell of Adolf Hitler, which is what inspired Stanley Milgram to perform his experiment. In this experiment, random people follow orders from others who claim to be scientists. Now imagine the authority possessed by a dictator, a leader with the caliber of Hitler. Hitler climbed the ranks visually and became a person in place of authority. But he also established his authority and ethos in his speeches. He did this through appealing to the sins upon Germany in the past, and how he will give his life to right those wrongs. We see this in his speeches where he says, "For months we have been suffering under the torture of the problem which the Versailles Diktat created, a problem which has deteriorated until it has become intolerable for us. And my whole life has been nothing but one long struggle for this people, faith in this people. One word I have never learned, that is, surrender." He also speaks about German culture to further his ethos and authority. Kenneth Burke quotes Hitler's Mein Kampf in his The Philosophy of Literary Form, while discussing how Hitler unified Germany, saying, "A state which represents not a mechanism of an economic consideration and interest alien to the people, but a folkish organization. This is making Hitler just another German, a part of something organic instead of the hypothetical head to a machine." Finally, Hitler appeals to religion by saying, "By fighting off the Jews, I'm doing the Lord's work." By doing this, he grasps for God's authority and for God's ethos. Hitler used his rhetoric in conjunction with authority and ethos to convince around 50 million people to do such terrible things. On top of his authority and ethos, he had other aspects of rhetoric. When listening to speeches like these, you can hear in recordings how he used excellent intonation and volume by raising his voice and becoming more gentle, by raising his voice and becoming more angry at the sins upon Germany, and lowering his volume and becoming more gentle as he lays down his life for all of Germany. The subject matter of these speeches articulates itself and shows that without his use of rhetoric, supported by authority and ethos, Hitler may never have reached the caliber he did. Julius Caesar was murdered on March 15, 44 BC, and Mark Antony, friend, kinsman, and consul, persuaded not only the murderers at Caesar's funeral, but also he persuaded them to turn, the people at Caesar's funeral, he persuaded them to turn onto the murderers we have recorded from Appian of Alexandria, Julius Caesar's funeral, a summary and quotes of what Mark Antony said. In this account of Appian, we learn that Mark Antony is related to Julius Caesar, which gives Antony the authority and ethos of a family member to talk at Caesar's funeral. Mark Antony is also a friend of Caesar and a consul of Rome, which gives Antony all the authority needed. We may be more familiar, however, with William Shakespeare's version. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Shakespeare took what he had and embellished, perhaps, but turned it into a rhetorical masterpiece. Mark Antony starts by addressing the crowd, first as friends, to build a relationship, and then as Romans, to address their pride in their country, and finally as countrymen. This was planned perfectly by Shakespeare to be the third word with 3 syllables contrasting the previous 1 and 2 syllables in friends and Romans. This gives an excellent build-up to address the crowd. Mark Antony's purpose in speaking to the people is to give Julius Caesar the honor and love he deserves after being murdered by Brutus and the rest. But he cannot stand up directly against the wild crowd and Brutus, so he uses rhetoric to imply all the good that Caesar has done. The good is oft interred with their bones implies that Caesar did good. I thrice presented him with a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. This meant that Caesar did not want to be a king. Antony also goes on to speak how Caesar wept for Rome and how he filled Rome's coffers. Mark Antony, with the entirety of Rome against him, is able to give Caesar a proper funeral, with praise, as well as turning the mob on the murderers, burning down the murderers' houses and making the murderers flee from the city. Along with the written rhetoric, which was performed on stage and on the screen, the actors portray the projection needed to reach an entire forum filled with people. The actors portray the vigor, volume, and emotion that is needed whenever presenting speeches. Mark Antony uses his authority and ethos to enhance his rhetoric and give Julius Caesar the respect, honor, and send-off deserved. Finally, the only reason the New Testament is relevant is because of Jesus' authority. As C.S. Lewis has famously said, that Jesus is either a liar, lunatic, or Lord in mere Christianity. We know that he is neither liar nor lunatic because of the ethos and authority he has laid down in Scriptures. Jesus is given the authority by the people as a teacher. They were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Mark 1:22. Meaning that he held the authority of a teacher and not someone relaying facts. The forces of nature bend to his authority. And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Hush, be still." And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. Mark 4:39. Furthermore, many, many times he is given authority from God the Father. For just as the Father has life in himself, even so he gave to the Son to have life in himself. And he gave him authority to execute judgment, because he is the Son of Man. John 5:26. As well as, and Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." Matthew 28:18. Finally, Jesus' authority can be physically felt. Now when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. John 18:6. Jesus' divine presence and authority was so powerful and pronounced as he said those words that the men were overcome. Jesus' authority is so undeniable that our entire Christian belief is based on it and would not exist without it. His authority and rhetoric also is the reason that we have the New Testament and our entire Christian belief system. Machiavelli says, "My view is it is desirable to be both loved and feared, but it is difficult to achieve both, and if one of them must be lacking, it is much safer to be feared than loved." Fear has often been used by those who have gained a status of authority. The list of truly good rulers is small and could probably be written on a poster. That being said, nearly every dictator, king, and ruler has been corrupt and ruled by fear. This could be an argument that fear best complements rhetoric, but we know through countless examples that hope can easily defeat fear. Hope is usually inspired by an authoritative figure, furthering their already good rhetoric, as I have discussed. The examples proving this include St. Crispin's Day speech from King Henry V, which urges the men to overcome their fear looming over them and to fight together. This is where the phrase, "we few, we happy few, we band of brothers," comes from. Aragorn, the Lost King, leads the armies against the forces of evil with words that dispel fear and inspire hope, saying literally, there is always hope. Paul labels Jesus as our King, as our hope, that we may endure through evil. Contrary to a ruler who uses fear to reinforce rhetoric, there are rulers and authoritative figures who are benevolent and are loved by the people under them. Another refutation to authority furthering rhetoric is that having people love you is a better aid for rhetoric. To sway people to consider you a good speaker, you must first get them to love you and accept your words. But to do this, you must have authority and ethos, or else you may find it extremely difficult to get those people to love and accept your words. So without authority and ethos, the argument for love and fear is null and void, because you cannot have love and fear without authority and ethos. After coming full circle, I only have the authority of a speaker, and you followed my requests, even if they were simple or childish. Furthermore, the scientists in the Milgram experiment used their ethos and authority to bolster their mediocre rhetoric. You may find authoritative figures today, but you must know that they can use these tools of ethos and authority, and that they can be used by good and bad people, which I have proved with examples of the epitome of human evil in Adolf Hitler, using these tools to lead the world into a bloody worldwide conflict. I also showed how it can be used in neutrality by Mark Antony, turning the Romans against Caesar's murderers. But I have also shown the epitome of human good in Jesus Christ, using ethos and authority to bring forth the New Testament gospel and lay the foundation for Christianity. Building your authority and your ethos will be the most effective way to defend your beliefs and spread the gospel with rhetoric. Thank you.